Of all the insane stories in rock history, nothing comes close to the night Keith Richards claimed he inhaled his own father. For years, fans didn't know if he was confessing, trolling, or revealing something deeply personal. But the truth behind that moment is far stranger, and far more human, than the legend that swallowed it whole, the rumor that shocked the world. When Keith Richards said it out loud, he didn't build it up. He didn't tease it. He didn't even blink. In a 2007 interview, he casually dropped the line, heard around the world. "I snorted my father's ashes." That one sentence detonated instantly. Headlines exploded. Radio hosts panicked. TV scripts were rewritten in minutes. Even people who didn't listen to the Rolling Stones suddenly had an opinion. Some said it was disgusting. Others said it was the most Keith Richards thing imaginable. And the rest couldn't stop asking the same question. Did he really do it? It spread so fast because people already believed Keith was capable of anything. This is the man who joked about his bloodstream being 95% poison. A man who lived through heroin busts, bans, overdoses he refuses to detail, and the kind of chaos only rock legends survive. So when he said he inhaled part of his father, why would anyone doubt him? But the real story didn't start in that interview room. It began years earlier. In a private moment Keith never expected anyone else to know about. The bond nobody saw coming. Keith Richards never pretended to come from a warm, picture-perfect home. His childhood was built on long stretches of absence, misunderstandings, and a quiet emotional distance that neither he nor his father ever learned how to fix. Burt Richards wasn't cruel. He was simply unreachable in the way many men of his generation were: tough, silent, practical. A man who didn't understand the wild, artistic spirit growing under his own roof. As Keith moved into adulthood, the gap between them only grew wider. Fame didn't bridge it. If anything, it made the divide feel even bigger. Burt had no reference point for the world his son was stepping into. Loud music, manic tours, drugs, rebellion, headlines, danger. Keith wasn't becoming a musician, he was becoming Keith Richards. And Burt didn't know how to talk to that version of his son. But time has a way of bending stubborn hearts. As the years passed, something softened between them. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the stability Keith finally built after surviving the chaos of the 70s and 80s. Or maybe Burt simply recognized that beneath the leather, the swagger, the madness, and the fame, there was still the kid he raised. And that kid had done something extraordinary. Slowly, quietly, they found their way back to each other. Burt started coming to gigs. He'd stand backstage, hands in his pockets, watching the crowd erupt the moment Keith hit the first chord. He didn't gush or brag, but Keith could feel his father's pride in small, almost invisible ways. A nod, a smile, a rare moment of softness. And Keith, who had spent decades building walls to protect himself from loss, let that pride sink in. So when Burt passed away in 2002, it wasn't just a personal loss, it was the loss of a relationship. Keith had only just learned how to cherish. Keeping some of the ashes wasn't a rock star stunt. It was a fragile attempt to hold on to a father he'd finally gotten back. The night everything happened. Keith Richards has survived enough chaos to fill 10 lifetimes, but the night that created one of rock's most unbelievable stories didn't start with fireworks, crowds, or wild parties. It began quietly, almost mundanely, inside his own home. No booze-fueled madness, no backstage insanity, just Keith, alone with his memories. Years had passed since Burt's funeral. The ashes were kept tucked away, untouched. Keith didn't talk about them. He didn't display them. He simply kept them close, like a sealed box of unfinished conversations. One evening he said he felt a pull, not spiritual, not dramatic, just a nudge from somewhere inside him, to open the container again. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. Even Keith couldn't explain it later. He lifted the lid, and that's when it happened. A small puff of ash floated upward and drifted down onto the surface in front of him. A surface that, in classic Keith Richards fashion, already had a dusting of cocaine on it. Not arranged, not prepared, just there. The two powders met in the most unlikely, bizarre, almost symbolic way possible. Keith said he stared at it for a moment, not horrified, not confused, just strangely calm. It wasn't a ritual, it wasn't planned, But the mixture was there, scattered across the mirror, and in a single instinctive motion, the kind of motion that had followed him through decades of habit and survival, he swept it into a line and inhaled. Keith didn't describe it as an emotional breakdown or a dramatic tribute. To him, it was a quiet moment of acceptance. Raw, strange, intimate. He didn't laugh. He didn't cry. He didn't analyze it. It just happened. A private, accidental collision of grief and instinct. Something he expected to keep to himself forever. But once the world discovered it, that tiny moment turned into a legend he could never outrun. When the story went nuclear. The moment Keith Richards' confession reached the public, the reaction wasn't gradual. It was instant detonation. 1 second, it was a throwaway quote in an interview, and the next, it was the most talked about sentence on the planet. Newsrooms scrambled to rewrite their morning broadcasts. Tabloids printed headlines so bold they barely seemed real. Radio hosts couldn't say the words out loud without pausing to laugh, gasp, or pretend to faint. It wasn't just a story. It was a cultural earthquake. Late-night talk show comedians treated it like a gift from the universe. They made jokes about Keith being indestructible, partially ceremonial, half human, half volcano ash. Memes spread across early internet forums. Fans debated the morality, the shock value, the humor, and the heartbreak all at once. It united the world in pure disbelief. But the chaos didn't come only from the shock of what Keith supposedly did. It came from who Keith Richards already was. To the public, Keith had never been a typical rock star. He was the benchmark for chaos, the man who outlived every scandal thrown his way. People joked that roaches would survive a nuclear blast, and so would Keith. So when the story broke, it didn't feel like something impossible. It felt like the next wild chapter in a life that had already rewritten the limits of survival. What made it even crazier was how casually Keith responded when reporters asked him to confirm it. He didn't deny it with outrage. He didn't defend it with drama. He just smirked and validated the rumor with the kind of nonchalant shrug only he could pull off. And that drove the media even deeper into hysteria. But behind the scenes, the Rolling Stones management was in crisis mode. They weren't laughing. They weren't amused. They were terrified. A story this bizarre could overshadow the band, the tour, the legacy, everything. So they rushed out a statement insisting the whole thing was a joke. Only Keith wouldn't play along. His refusal to back down made the story mutate. It became a beast with no owner, a rumor too bizarre to suppress, too personal to ignore, and too perfectly Keith Richards to ever truly fade. And that's when the legend stopped being a headline and became a global obsession, the debate, joke, or truth. When the story reached full meltdown, the Rolling Stones management scrambled to put out the fire. Their official statement was quick, defensive, and almost desperate. Keith was clearly joking, they insisted. Just a wild comment from a man known for outrageous humor. Nothing real, nothing to see. But the problem wasn't the statement. It was Keith. Because Keith Richards didn't back it up. When reporters pressed him, expecting a laugh or playful denial, Keith didn't flinch. He didn't soften the rumor, twist it, or turn it into comedy. Instead, he leaned in with that blunt, unfiltered tone he's known for. "You can't make that shut up, mate. My dad wouldn't have cared." That single sentence shattered the management's explanation. Suddenly, the polished PR version looked like a flimsy shield, while Keith's own words felt disarmingly honest. Fans were left stuck between a corporate denial and the chaotic sincerity of a man who never cared about playing safe. And that's what made the moment so mysterious. Keith's tone changed from interview to interview, not in meaning, but in mood. Sometimes he sounded casual, as if the whole thing had unfolded without a second thought. Other times he grinned with a spark in his eye, almost daring people to try and separate truth from mischief. Was it a joke he decided to turn into a confession? A confession he disguised as a joke? Or a messy emotional moment blown open by the press? The uncertainty only fueled the legend, and in typical Keith Richards fashion, he never clarified it. He just let the world chase its own tail. A wild legacy and a larger myth. Keith Richards didn't become a legend because of his guitar alone. He became a legend because he survived everything the world threw at him, and everything he threw at himself. His life reads like a manual on how to push every boundary and somehow walk away smiling, Drug busts, bans from countries, courtroom appearances, overdoses he refuses to break down publicly, and injuries that would have ended most people. Keith took it all and kept moving. Fans joked that cockroaches and Keith Richards would be the last two things alive after a nuclear blast. And somehow, that didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a prophecy. So, when the Ashes story surfaced, the world didn't see it as a tragedy or even a scandal. They saw it as the most Keith Richards moment imaginable, a wild, messy, impossibly symbolic accident that fit perfectly into the mythology surrounding him. The man who cheated every danger imaginable now carried a story so bizarre, so surreal, it almost felt poetic. But what most people missed was that this moment wasn't about being wild. It wasn't about shock value or rebellion. It wasn't about drugs, chaos, or pushing limits. It was about a son navigating grief in a way that made sense only to him. And for once, it wasn't the world pushing Keith into madness. It was Keith simply being human. In quieter interviews years later, Keith's tone revealed something much deeper. He didn't sound like a rock star bragging about another outrageous stunt. He sounded like a man reflecting on a lifetime of near-death experiences, broken relationships, and the rare bonds he managed to keep. He talked about mortality with a sharp clarity, almost amused that he, of all people, was still here to process it. The Ashes story wasn't just another wild chapter in his life. It was a tiny window into the vulnerable, imperfect, deeply emotional man behind the myth. A man who, despite the chaos, still felt loss, still felt love, still felt the weight of connections broken and repaired. And it was that raw humanity, hidden beneath the swagger, that made the legend even larger. Keith's final explanation. As the years rolled on and the frenzy cooled, Keith Richards began speaking about the Ashes story in a way that stunned fans, not with shock value, but with honesty. The swagger was still there, but the edges were softer. The older Keith didn't sound like the man who once lived on the edge of every disaster imaginable. He sounded reflective, almost gentle, describing the moment with a clarity that only time could give. He never fully denied it. He never fully confirmed every detail either. Instead, he explained it as a strange, private collision of grief and instinct. Something that happened in a split second and stayed with him much longer than he expected. It wasn't intentional, he said. It just happened, and in a weird way, it felt right. There was no bragging, no shock value, just truth in its rawest, simplest form. He spoke about his father with respect, even affection, describing a bond that arrived late but arrived full force. Losing Bert wasn't something he processed easily, and keeping the Ashes nearby wasn't part of a dark ritual. It was part of holding on to a relationship he wished he'd had longer. For the first time, listeners heard the real human behind the legend. Not Keith the survivor, not Keith the outlaw, not Keith the immortal symbol of rock chaos. Just a man who had made peace with his past, his father, and himself. In those quieter moments, the Ashes story stopped being a punchline and finally became something real. In the end, the truth behind that night isn't about shock value or scandal. It's about grief, memory, and the strange human ways we hold on to the people we lose. Keith Richards didn't build a legend that night. The world did. All he did was live a moment only he could understand. If you love uncovering the hidden stories behind music's wildest legends, make sure you hit subscribe to Backstage Melody and stay with us. The next story is even crazier.